Dr. Dano Wanzer.
There you go.
Appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much. So I wanted to talk with you about your recent paper. I'm really excited about that. And then some other things too that we can talk about. So you have a paper that you published in AJE called What is Evaluation? Perspectives of how evaluation differs or not from research. So can you talk about like why this topic interests you? I mean, to write a paper, it takes a lot of time and to do the study and analysis, just everything that went into this. This was not a quick project. You had to have, I guess, an interest in it, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited. I've very much enjoyed your podcast and listened to the back catalog and watched the YouTube videos. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me here.
Cool. Thanks.
This all started back in graduate school. So I studied at Claremont Graduate University, and, studying evaluation, day one, I was like, I don't even know what evaluation is. But once I found out, I was like, oh, I'm hooked. This is it. This is exactly what I've been, trying to put into words, and didn't know there was a term or a field for it. So it was very serendipitous, I think, to end up at Claremont when that was not the goal, to go into evaluation. And so as I'm going through my master's degree program, I had my heart set on getting a PhD. And so I was writing down all these ideas in a little notebook of thesis ideas. What could my first study be for my thesis once I got into the PhD program? Mm-hmm. And so that was one of my first things that I wrote in my book, was like, what is the difference between research and evaluation? And it's something that throughout my graduate school, especially my first few years, I would always struggle with, like, how would I describe the difference between research and evaluation? Why is there a difference? Do the differences matter? What might those differences be? And so I just kept grappling with it. And as I continued to revisit, it didn't become my thesis, didn't become my dissertation, but I kept going back to it. And eventually I was like, well, I need to do this study. I need to do something with this, because it's something that's bothering me so much that it's a question that I felt was really important to help answer. And so, looking to the literature to see what's out there, it quickly became obvious that this was something that a lot of people were grappling with as well. And nobody had really done research on it. It was just a lot of really good thought work on the topic. And so I wanted to extend that into an empirical study to find out, well, how do people define what evaluation is, and how do they differentiate from research? Because both are the issue, right? It's not just how do we differentiate from research, but also how do we define it? I know we'll talk about in a bit, Amy Gullickson's article, because I think it's a great, very serendipitous as well that those two articles came out right around the same time. So like I took mine for my paper from a very empirical standpoint, a very descriptive standpoint, and hers is much more a prescriptive standpoint of what should the definition of evaluation be. And I think putting the two together, I think, is really helpful in how I now, approach it and thinking about what is evaluation and research. Yeah.
Well, I really like the summary. Some of the tables in your article are really helpful. Like the distinction between the two. That table, I could see using that a lot in instruction. So I appreciate that. I think a lot of people will be using that. It's a nice kind of adding to what's out there and building on that. And then your review is really nice. And then the findings. Let's talk about the findings. So maybe a brief summary of the findings, and then like anything that surprised you. Anything that surprised you from, and I guess you could talk a little bit just about what you did too, because assuming people read it, probably shouldn't.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So methods were, I asked folks, and I primarily sampled folks from the American Evaluation Association as well as the American Educational Research Association. So I will caveat that primarily either evaluators or educational researchers are who I was asking. It'd be very interesting to do this study with economists as a follow-up, because I think they'd have very different answers. But I approach it as with a simple survey. I wanted a simple survey that folks would be, encouraged to take and not feel overly burdened with. And it was very simple of like, open-ended question, how do you define evaluation? Mm-hmm. Open-ended question, how do you differentiate evaluation from research, if at all? And then a follow-up after that, okay, based on your definition and differentiation answers, which of these 5 diagrams, the diagrams being in the article, best matches your description. And those 5 diagrams are basically evaluation is applied research. They're one and the same. Mm-hmm. That evaluation and applied research intersect like a Venn diagram. That evaluation is a subset of research. That research is a subset of evaluation, and that they exist on a continuum. And I asked that, and then I asked a variety of like, okay, on these dimensions that I provided, are there like to what extent do you think they differ? Evaluation research differ, for example, on generalizability or the purpose of the study or the questions that are asked. So do not differ, differ somewhat, differ greatly, and a few demographic questions, and that was it. And so nice, short and sweet. Overall results found that basically, if we think of Amy Gullickson's article and thinking both the logic of evaluation and the fully described, fully judged component, that values and judgment piece was one of the things that really came out, that a lot of people, evaluation is about making those value judgments. In the evaluation literature, there's also this component that some people use to just define evaluation that's related to the purpose of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Scriven is very much, no, the purpose of evaluation has nothing to do with how we define evaluation. But a lot of evaluators do think the purpose is worthwhile mentioning. The purpose is not just to define, to make that value judgment, but often for learning purposes, decision-making purposes, that type of thing. And evaluators...
It's a means to an end a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the value judgment is not the end all be all. There's something more to it. That's right. What makes evaluation the field that we are in. Perhaps it's, I won't go into that, but so there's we've got this kind of dichotomy there, which, I think we're starting to explore a little bit more like the different types of evaluators and how they, might differ on theirs. But for the most part, evaluators thought that decision-making piece was also kind of important, more so than researchers did. And then the one big finding is basically that evaluators thought that evaluation and research intersect like a Venn diagram, mm-hmm. suggesting that evaluation has these unique components to it beyond the social science research frame.
So they overlap, kind of like they kind of, okay. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Venn diagram.
Got it.
Whereas researchers tended to think of evaluation more as a subset of research, that mm-hmm. evaluation just a type of research. It's a method in the methodological toolbox of research. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's it. And I think the implications of that are pretty important, that if researchers think evaluation is just a method, that perhaps they don't really recognize evaluation as being a distinct field, a distinct area of study, as having unique aspects beyond research. So that's one big finding. And then the second big finding is that evaluators, not surprisingly, given the definitional differences, did see a lot more differences between research and evaluation on those components. Like they thought more things differed, and they differed more greatly than did researchers. Between evaluation and research. So we see the unique aspect, but people outside our field don't necessarily see that. And that's kind of the communication, field building, professionalization problem associated with all this, and why I think a lot of people are grappling with this question.
I think there's a lot of people who are more like methodologists, statisticians, so forth, in the social sciences, who don't really know what evaluation is. Like if you push them to say, okay, well, okay, so it's a subset. Okay, so, but what is it? Define it. The definition, they would be like, I don't know. It'd be like the same. It's the same. I've heard that many times. Either I don't know, or they're really the same thing. Yeah, we have stakeholders too. We have, so that's I think that's interesting. Now it's a small sample, just people that I have talked with who are not evaluators, but I think we do have to do a better job of really explaining, which is one of the points in your paper, explaining like what we do, what's unique about it. But at the same time, it's a challenge, right? Like, how do you do that when you still, haven't really defined the field? I mean, we know what physicians do generally. We know what licensed psychologists do. We know what if you're an architect, we know what you can, and you're licensed by the state or regulated in some way. We know what you can do, what you can't do. But with evaluations, a bit different, quite different, I guess. What I wonder. I wonder where it's going to head. I wonder if we're going to have some sort of more professionalization in the field. Do you have thoughts on that, or do you think about that at all? Yeah.
Yeah, I do think about this a lot. Bianca Montrose Moorhead and I are doing kind of a follow-up study that I think helps us at least think about how this could have be used for professionalization. I see our field moving in that direction, at least here in the United States. The recently adopted competencies are clearly a step towards professionalization. They are not indicative of necessarily that we are a profession just yet. Mm-hmm. But Bianca and I have been approaching it not so much as are we a profession or not, but more so, okay, regardless of that question, how do we distinguish ourselves from other similar fields or professions? Kind of thinking about what those boundaries are between evaluation and, in our case, research for the most part. And so we talk about it a lot about should we professionalize? And I fully recognize both sides of the argument. And I think they both have good, valid arguments for why or why not we should professionalize. In one regard, that I think our research is pointing towards is we need to professionalize to better communicate to others outside of our field who we are, what we do, and how we are supposed to do this work. Because if we don't have those professional boundaries, then, and we see this all the time, then funders get to dictate how evaluation is done. And it doesn't always align with our set of competencies, our ethical guiding principles, the personal frameworks and approaches that we use in evaluation. They'll just say, no, this is what we expect. And that may not align with what you want to do as an evaluator or what you think is maybe even ethical as an evaluator.
They call it evaluation. They say, we want to do an evaluation. We'll fund, 10% of the project will go towards this. But then when you look at it, it's really maybe not evaluation, or arguably not.
Yeah, right. And so often it's, depending on the type of funder, often it's an RCT, right? That is what's most highly recognized by clearinghouses like the What Works Clearinghouse as the highest level of evidence type thing. And that is a method in our evaluation toolbox, just like it's a method in the research toolbox, but it is not sufficient. It's one way to do evaluation. It's not sufficient in and of itself, is not fully encompassing that fully judged piece that Amy Gullickson's article talks about, that is really key to being an evaluation. So I get the sense that a lot of people think evaluation is an RCT, and that is what it is. There might be some more to it, but when people, especially I think researchers, are approaching it, it's am I doing an RCT with a program? Cool, that's an evaluation. And then the problem I see with that, and this is what I'm starting to see in this follow-up study that we're doing, is that we're talking with researchers who are working in deeply embedded in programmatic contexts, working really closely with stakeholders. And they are talking about how they're rejecting the typical applied research kind of swoop in, swoop out, not really being invested in the program, all this stuff. And they're talking about rejecting that notion. But then you talk to them, well, what do you think about evaluation? They're like, no, this isn't evaluation. And I'm like, in many regards, I think you're practicing very similarly to evaluation, and how a lot of evaluators approach that type of work. And I'm pretty certain that they just have this misconception of what evaluation is, and therefore they don't even explore this wide field that we have, this knowledge that we have about, and expertise about working with stakeholders to answer questions of interest to them, that also have interest to general knowledge building. Oftentimes, we have these areas of expertise that aren't getting tapped into because there's not this lack of recognition that we are our own field and own profession with our own bodies of knowledge, that unfortunately we're not communicating with one another.
Yeah, well, having a variety of definitions doesn't help,
It does not.
Back to that. So with the let's say you mentioned Amy Gullickson's article, and I spoke with her. Great. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
It was.
And so she has an article. What actually first attracted me to the article was the title was The Whole Elephant: Defining Evaluation. It was in evaluation program planning, the journal. And so this is her definition. I'm going to have to read it here because I don't know it from memory, which it seems like you almost know it by memory, or maybe you do. Let's see. Evaluation is the generation of a credible and systematic determination of merit, worth, and or significance of an object through the application of defensible criteria and standards to demonstrably relevant empirical facts. In one breath would be impressive, but I had to breathe a couple times there. So tell me about that. What do you, so reflecting on that definition, what do you think of it? What's your, like, okay, I guess I could just ask you, like, what do you say to people when they, like, who maybe are researchers, because you interact in your department probably with maybe a lot of people that don't know much about evaluation, although you have more of an established program, I think, there, right?
Yeah.
But how do you explain it to others? Let's say your students, to faculty, to people who are who work at human service organizations, who provide programs, services. Yeah, how do you explain it?
So I very much agree with the article by Sarah Mason and Ashley Hunt that came out, I think 2019, and also the American Journal of Evaluation. Sarah Mason was my colleague. Well, both of them were my colleagues at Claremont Graduate University. And they looked into that very question. How do we communicate what evaluation is to a variety of other people? And the basic finding from that is it's contextual, depends on who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to a colleague at my institution at University of Wisconsin-Stout, I'm going to approach it like how it kind of typically define evaluation sort of is like, I work with programs to help evaluate how effective they're doing, how they can improve their services, how they can better meet the needs of the people that they're working with. That's typically how I approach it. And then when somebody's like, oh, I know about evaluation, then I can get nerdy into it, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm talking to like my mom's friend, and my mom and my my family kind of knows what I do a little bit, but like I'm just gonna be like, I kind of work with programs, do like research like stuff with them about how they're doing what they're doing and how they can improve what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I kind of simplify things a little bit. I remember I would always poke my husband of like, what do you think I do? And one time it was like, you survey children. It's like, yeah, I mean, sometimes that's part of it, but like people come with a variety of different levels of expertise and experience with evaluation and related fields. So like with my students, I can expect them to know a little bit about what research is, not evaluation, but what research is. And so that's kind of one reason why I like my study and why I assign it as reading, is because they've got that kind of heuristic in mind already. Like, okay, research is this. And then it's like, well, how is it similar and different from research to evaluation? And so then they can see, okay, those methods are pretty similar. The designs are pretty similar, but it's like the stakeholder involvement piece, the purpose piece, the questions piece, the dissemination piece, those are the differences. And so I spend more time in my classes on those components as well. Like I do need to cover the methods a little bit, but they get that in their methods training in general and their research training in general. So I don't have to cover it as much because a survey is a survey for the most part, at least in my opinion. And then it's just how it's implemented can differ a little bit, and how it fits into the overall purpose and dissemination, that's going to differ a lot.
The definition of evaluation, I think it's really important. You see, let's say with a lot of health human service organizations, folks running those programs, when they need to find an evaluator for let's say a federal grant or a foundation grant, it's required to have an evaluator, let's say. So they'll need to reach out, find someone, and a lot of times they'll look for people who are researchers who have content area, domain familiarity, like with whatever. If it's after school, they'll look for someone with after school, and then the assumption many times with the person that they're bringing on is because they have that domain content familiarity, and that they have a background, they know statistics, they took it, they use it, whatever, or some qualitative, whatever it is, the methodological sophistication, understanding that they can do the evaluation. It's never, that's the assumption. It's never even talked about beyond that, right? So I think that we have to do better to address that kind of issue. I think that comes up, and what could an evaluator do that would maybe be a bit different on this project, or could be at least.
Well, to some extent, that's kind of why I think that evaluators should have some subject matter expertise beyond evaluation. That, and there are great evaluators that are pure generalists, that they'll work in any context, but they do it well because they partner with subject matter experts, right? But I think it also helps to be, for example, I'm a youth program evaluator. Could I go and do an evaluation in some other context? Sure. I would definitely bring in subject matter expertise, but at least if I go into a youth program context, like an after school program, I'm going to feel really comfortable in that because I've done a lot of evaluations in that field. Computer science education, I feel a lot more comfortable in that field as well. And then you start branching out, and I feel less and less comfortable, and I don't feel like I can bring that expertise in. Going from the other side, though, the pure subject matter experts without the evaluation expertise, I always found it funny that a lot of our projects at Claremont would come from programs who had partnered with such people and were like, no, this is not working for us. Can you help us? And so we had to come in and kind of rescue the evaluation, because what typically happens, at least from the folks that end up coming to us afterwards, is they're coming in with a pure research agenda, not thinking about what is the program's needs. They don't communicate well with the program about what they're doing and why they're doing it, why it's important, because it could be important, but it's just there's a lack of alignment. And that makes the program who's paying for these services very frustrated, right? And so then they seek out people who's like, well, this is what we need. We need to get funding. We need to do this. We need to figure out if this is working or whatnot. They wanted to do some weird research project that sounds cool, but it's not relevant to what we do. And so I think that's the big key about what we do is we are there to work with the programs, sure, to get paid, we need our livelihoods, but we're there to help them in their capacities. And we bring in our expertise because sometimes we're like, well, that's not quite what you should be focusing on. Let's start here first. We can get there later, right? Everybody wants to jump to outcomes. You're not often ready for the outcomes. So we can help them get to that point versus, and so this is the topic of my dissertation, was looking at how evaluations are similar to research practice partnerships, where researchers partner with practitioners to develop partnerships. The University of Chicago Consortium is one really big example, long-term example of that. Yep. And they're really awesome. I love research practice partnerships. I think that they're kind of the in-between what we do as evaluators and what researchers do typically, though, right? Because researchers tend to still have kind of their own agenda coming in. They want to get published. They want to contribute to the general knowledge base. They want to get access to data that they can do other things with, versus maybe an evaluator is interested in that, but for the most part, we're there, work with the program, help the program out, do what they need, meet their needs. There's a general philosophical, an orientation difference, just how you're oriented. You're oriented towards the program, towards what their needs are, towards helping. That is the primary kind of goal. Most evaluators would agree with that. Most, not all, but most maybe. I would say so. I get some pushback from some folks because I think they think when I say that it's we're purely altruistic about it. We're just doing it for the love of the program. And I think some of us are doing it for the love of the programs we're working with, but others are nah, the program's beneficial, but I'm just doing my job. I'm okay, cool. I love evaluations so much that I can't, if that were my mentality, I would not care about doing this very much. I love what I do, and I do it because I love working the programs. But yeah, not everybody agrees, and I do get pushback on that. So I was watching this really cool webinar
on machine learning and design in like computer applications. And so they were talking about like how to incorporate machine learning into different applications, like how you use machine learning like on Pinterest, and how it should be the user experience. I should have said the UX, the user experience. It was really neat. But what stood out for me, aside from the content, was the presenter was describing really an evaluation process. Didn't use the word evaluate. Well, used evaluate a few times, didn't refer to the value part of it, but was more like figuring out what works, getting feedback, using some quant-qual methods in order to figure out how to make the UX with, bringing ML into an application, like how to do that more effectively. So what I was like distracted by internally, which happens sometimes, was like, well, do we need like a better word than evaluation? We'd say program evaluation, and then some people really don't like that, right? But like, do we need another word? Because everyone uses this word evaluation, right? I mean, in every field, and they don't know who we are or what we do, let's say, for example. But is there another term or another way that we need to describe how we conceptualize evaluation? What's your thought about that? I'm not sure. I have no idea what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either. I have talked to people who are adamant that we need a new word, and other people that think that evaluation is sufficient and does sufficiently and adequately and accurately define what we do. I think the issue is the perhaps negative connotations that are associated with the word. Mm-hmm. That evaluation anxiety, for one, that unfortunately, evaluation also has different meanings in different fields, right? So like evaluation in computer programming is a very different thing of like determining whether actually, I'm not sure. I've never really investigated it. I would assume evaluating if your coding works, if making sure that your code works.
It might not be relevant, but it's like, it was more around the UX, like the user experience, right?
Right.
And like how you tie in the machine learning into the user experience. So
and I do see user experience as a very similar field that could also, we could be partnering more in that. For instance, at Claremont, our cognitive psychology program, at least from what I heard, dropped the co-concentration and evaluation so that they could focus on user experience. And I'm like, okay, cool. But, the evaluation could be user experience. The problem is we approach, at least at Claremont, and I think the majority of the field approaches our evaluation from a program evaluation standpoint, and user experience focuses the evaluation. It's a different evaluand that it's focusing on. And it does shift things a little bit. The whole general logic of evaluation stays the same, but the end result, the purpose is a little different, and what the thing that's being evaluated is a little different, and who the stakeholder is a little different. And so it changes things to the point that there feels like there's a disconnect when really I don't think there is, or at least it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay. We touched on this a little bit before, but if let's say this has happened to me, and I'm just interested in what you might say, but and maybe you're going to repeat what you said already, but if you had to convince a methodologist in the social sciences, someone let's say, who doesn't have a particular interest in evaluation, doesn't know what evaluation is, that evaluation and research are distinct, that they overlap, like we said, with the Venn diagram, but evaluation is not just sort of embedded within research. And you don't have much time to do that, maybe. How would you
elevator
do that?
speech?
What would your brief bulleted pointed like elevator speech be? Yeah.
I think I would emphasize that we work primarily with stakeholders to determine what we are examining, like what we are studying and how we are studying. Like there's more of a partnership lens that, unlike research, tends not to. It tends to be like, oh, I'd be interested in studying this. Let me go find a place where I can go study it, as opposed to somebody comes to me usually and is like, I need help with this. Can you help me? And it's like, yes, I can do that. And so I would emphasize like, I'm there to help support them in whatever their needs are as a program to determine whether or not it works and how well it works, that merit worth significance type thing, the value judgment piece. And yeah, we use a lot of similar methods. But I am working primarily for the program to help the program as opposed to coming in with my kind of long-term research agenda, trying to get published in the peer-reviewed literature. Like, no, my stuff tends to end with the final report and presentation to the stakeholders as opposed to getting published. Like sometimes it gets published, but the framing is going to be very different than how I approached it with the stakeholders.
Okay. Well, you kept me interested, so I think you would definitely you could make a good argument there, a concise, a succinct argument there. That sounds that makes sense to me. What evaluation? Which evaluation theories do you use most in your work or theory? Like, what is your kind of shifting gears a little bit? I think. What's your approach look like?
So. Mostly for my training, but theory-driven evaluation is a big one. Like Stuart Donaldson, Huey Chen's theory-driven evaluation. I try to be I have a collaborative approach. Definitely, I try to be more participatory when I can. I don't. It's not always what I'm able to do, and not what I was necessarily trained to do. I try to take a very contingency-based approach. I almost always have a theory-driven lens to what I'm doing, but it's very contingent based on the context of where I'm working, who I'm working with, what their needs are. So I don't. It doesn't really necessarily change the broad theory or approaches that I use.
What is that? Yeah, what does that mean exactly? The contingency.
I think this comes from Huey Chen as well, of just kind of taking more of like a pragmatic epistemological approach to the work that I'm doing, rather than coming in with a particular lens and a particular framework. I try to, sometimes I come in and it's like, yeah, an RCT would be great. Sometimes I come in and it's like, wow, we really need to do a needs assessment. Sometimes I see that they really need to work on improving their use. So I take a much more capacity building lens and utilization focused lens to the work that I'm doing. Sometimes the program is really interested in more of a democratic evaluation approach. So I'll do more of a values engaged or democratic approach. So I try to be a little flexible in what I do, although typically it's utilization focused, collaborative and theory driven. And I'm working on improving my knowledge and understanding of social justice evaluation approaches, equitable evaluation approaches to build that into my typical evaluation approaches.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the theory side, the social science theory that you find that you end up using or helpful in your work that maybe comes up frequently. What is there any? Are there any particular? Are there orientations or findings or just, I guess, theories, models that you use from the social sciences you find that are particularly helpful?
Yeah. So my background and training in psychology, I tend to gravitate towards psychological theories and frameworks. And then particularly I was developmental psychologist. So one of my favorites and the one that permeates a lot of my thinking all the time is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological framework. It's a systems framework, which basically is that, the individual me is nested within a variety of different larger and less concrete systems and areas that also interact with one another to affect the individual. And it just as a general framework of thinking with the systems lens, it's just constantly thinking about what else could be affecting the individual in a program and always looking at like kind of those interaction effects. So I like doing like interaction type effects, looking at kind of moderation analyses to see like how does this effect differ based on individual characteristics, based on contextual characteristics, based on family characteristics, after school program characteristics,
Different
and then
levels.
how do those different levels and how those kind of affect like program outcomes, for instance. So I tend to take that lens a lot. Lately, taking more of like an identity lens, so social identity theory is something I've been learning a lot more about and bringing that to my work. Theory of planned behavior is also something I'm learning more about. Like if I could go back though, I would have studied social or organizational psychology, because those are the ones that keep coming up more and more versus the developmental psychology, which is great for like studying the program, but like in thinking about how I approach the evaluation, the other two are usually a lot more relevant to all the things that I'm doing.
Cool. Yeah. I think that there's a lot in social psychology that we can use in our programs when we consider could it really help with program design.
Exactly.
Absolutely. With the decision making, like the bias and heuristics and bias in decision making and or cognitive and bias in thinking. Things like understanding like cognitive dissonance theory and its impact. There's a ton there. What do you say for your students as they really want to dig into evaluation, learn more about it? What do you recommend for them? Where do you point them? What's your MO?
Yeah, well, they come into our program, and if they're coming into our program, they usually don't care much about evaluation or know what it is, but they're required to take our first evaluation class, which gets them sucked in. And so it's just kind of like all the stuff I teach with, right? That is how I approach it, because most of the time they're not really eager about it until they see like the effect of what they've done. And so it's not until like the end of the year that they're like, ooh, I think this could be the career for me. It usually takes them a while because they come in, they're like, I want to be an IO psychologist. And then I get to rope them into like, oh, you could do that in a NORG field, but you could do evaluation, right? Like similar. And probably aligned with what you're doing anyways or interested in. So
you have them learn. They learn through some sort of project or something like that?
Service learning project. So we have a year-long course sequence in our program, and it's their first year. They work with a local client. I usually go out and find the clients because by that point they're not usually familiar with the area. So I'll find a few organizational clients to work with in a variety of different sectors and areas who will work with us to do an evaluation throughout the year. So the students work directly with the programs. I take a very hands-off approach to that. And it's like, no, you are their evaluators and I'm just helping supervise. So they work directly with the clients to, in the fall semester, develop their evaluation plans, their proposals.
As a team. There's like a few students together. Okay, yeah.
Yep. Usually in groups of 3 to 4. I try not to do any smaller or less, or smaller or bigger than that. But when group sizes change, it sometimes affects things. And then in the spring semester, they do their evaluation, get their IRB approval, finalize their measures, collect their data, analyze their data, report back to stakeholders.
Nice. So the students who maybe they come to your class, you don't see them again. How do you hope that the experience, like learning about evaluation, will impact them in their future work? Like, when you think about that?
Because I know some people teach evaluation or know their students are primarily going to come out of it of like consumers of evaluation, people who will work with an evaluator in the future. I'm training my students to be future evaluators. I know not all of them will be, but at least they know that that's a career opportunity that they could pursue if they want to. And so I think of it as they were probably going to go into like a research analyst type position in the first place. This is broadening the particular jobs that they can go into once they leave our program. Because they're getting a degree in an MS in applied psychology. And so they get this content expertise in IO psychology. They can bring that to a variety of fields. And this just opens up the possibilities for them. So I do teach it as like, I want you to become a future evaluator. And if you don't become a future evaluator, okay, you've learned how to work directly with stakeholders. You've learned good teamwork skills. You've learned good methodological skills that would apply to any research project. You've learned the real world messiness of doing all of this work. You've learned project management skills. You've learned how to do a little bit of budgeting and time management. Like these are skills that regardless of where you're going to go, like you're going to need these skills.
Yeah. And some of those they wouldn't learn if they were, let's say doing some sort of like practica or they had a year-long experience that was not an evaluation, that was like a typical research kind of partnership or something like that. They might not learn, let's say, depending who's teaching.
Yeah, they might not. Yeah. Some of the things I think are really critical are the stakeholder involvement piece, like how to work with stakeholders and meet their needs. I don't know. I at least the way we approach our practicums, because we also have a practicum requirement, it's very similar. Some of them will do more research experiences, but by then at least they've learned how messy it can be.
Right.
Like coming out of the class, honestly, a lot of the students are like, "Oh, I wish I'd done things so differently." I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of wish you did too, but." I let you learn from your failures, and now you're never going to make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. Or now you need to plan ahead of time. Usually it's time management, right? That I didn't realize it would take that long. I'm like, I tried to warn you.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I hear myself saying that a lot.
Right.
So we've been doing some work. There's a group of us working on a paper right now on mindfulness and evaluation, and I've talked about that a bit and sort of blogged about it or posted on it. Like, using like reflective questions to build mindfulness, building on some other, some physicians who've done work in that for their own training programs. But I was wondering, certainly mindfulness is beyond reflective questions. There's other aspects to it as well. And it's also beyond, it's not just meditation. But I'm wondering if you see, to what extent you might see mindfulness helping to support maybe the competencies that we're talking about, maybe help evaluators do a better job. Like, what is there a role? Is there a place? And you said that there was some work that maybe you were doing or some people you were talking with about that. So I'm interested in your insights on that or thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I love about our program is that Tiffany Smith, who's now at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, she had my position before I came here, and she developed a course for our graduate students or revised a pre-existing course for our graduate students on interpersonal effectiveness. And so we have an explicit course focusing on the competency of interpersonal skills. Which I think we are the only program that has that. And I have grown to love the fact that we have that as a course. And I feel very honored to get to teach that course because it's a life-changing course for our students, a life-changing course for myself. Yeah. And so in that course, we focus on a lot of interpersonal skills, but and then Libby Smith, current AEA board member, who is our program director at Stout. So I'm very fortunate to have an evaluation colleague as well in our program. When she started teaching the course, she brought in a mindfulness practice, mindfulness meditation type practice at the beginning of every class. And I've incorporated that as well because from a pedagogical standpoint, I think having that at the start of what is a 3-hour class once a week is really great for us to build presence in the moment. And, take a moment. You've had a day. We're in the afternoon now. There are things going on in your life. And especially last year with everything that was going on with the multiple pandemics, it was nice to be like, okay, there are things going on. Let's take a moment. Let's breathe together. Let's, focus on what we're doing and think now to what are we doing here today and who are we with? Let's be prepared to have good conversations. And and not forget that those things are existing, but just be prepared to be in this moment with the rest of us together. So I find it really like incredibly helpful for that. But the three of us, Tiffany, Libby, and I, have been working together. Libby developed this framework on wholehearted interpersonal practices about how we can better cultivate that presence, and which would only just impact our interpersonal qualities and skills that, of course, are a competency in our field. So like there are things that we need to focus on. But we're just of the mind, like, one, these things need to be taught. They need to be practiced on a regular basis, and that they're only going to improve our evaluation skills. So I'm fully on board with all of this. I think this is incredible. I tend to approach it from more of like a journal reflecting standpoint, journal reflections standpoint. But in that class, we practice a variety of other techniques to build that mindfulness, to practice our reflection, both personally and interpersonally. Because I think the one thing we talk about a lot is that the reflective practice is not a solo effort. It's something that's done in community. And I think this is why sometimes I struggle with the whole journaling aspect of reflective practice, because I'd rather like have a dialogue, me and you, let's talk, like I'm having this issue or this thing happened, I don't know what to do about it. Having that dialogue is so critical and so helpful for doing it, as opposed to I'm just going to try to journal it because I'm lacking other perspectives on it, especially external perspectives that I'm too in the weeds right now or too emotional about the situation to have a clear mind about it just yet. But they do, and they can help navigate me through the situation, and I for them as well.
Yeah, so maybe both the journaling and having the community, or having an opportunity to be able to reflect with others. I think that there's a place for mindfulness practice with virtually every career discipline, right? You see it being used in a very focused way to address stress in certain like high stress professions, from military, police, first responders, to litigators, to attorneys, teachers. It's a high stress profession. I think programs developed for that. And I think that, and a lot of those disciplines have a high burnout rate. In evaluation, we don't necessarily, it doesn't seem like, it can be very high stress. It can certainly be high stress. There can be a lot of pressure, let's say. It doesn't seem like burnout is particularly high among evaluators, just based on looking at one study. I don't know how much it's been studied in detail, but I think, mindfulness practice can be something that can support, like you're saying, a reflective practice, can help build openness, like decrease defensiveness, openness to things that are maybe inconsistent with our initial beliefs. A lot of times we want to I want to sort of defend the ideas that I have, and don't even realize that I'm doing it. So just noticing when that comes up, when there's conflicting cognitions or emotions that I'm uncomfortable with, that maybe sort of try to push away automatically, just noticing that process is something that noticing can be something that could be cultivated, could be built using a practice, a formal practice. But I think that there's applications across areas, and I think within our field, there's certainly a space for it. What so resources that you suggest for like the beginning evaluators, people who are interested in evaluation, that maybe you provide your students, like what are some specific resources that might be helpful?
I've lately ditched the textbook, so I try to bring in a variety of different resources to my students when I'm teaching them, so that they get kind of a wide variety of perspectives from folks. And I should have better prepared for this question, because I'm like my bookcase is right here with all of my books, and
well, we could put in the notes, so if there's like specific things, or if there's we could put like a list of
Yeah, I'll
different
see what I can do off the top
websites.
of my head.
Okay, good.
I think one of my favorite to like really start off with is Marv Alkin and Ann Vo's book, The A to Z's Evaluation Essentials, I think it's called.
Yeah.
I like that as
Yeah.
a small little book to help folks kind of get into the field. Donna Podum's book, is it Being an Evaluator? I think it is. That's also really good, like getting into like the thought processes. And I really like that one because it really shows like what it means to be an evaluator as opposed to the evaluation process. Like
Hmm.
it's more of a person focus as opposed to process product focused. Um, Veronica Thomas and Patricia Campbell, I think, came out with a recent textbook, Evaluation in Today's Society, I think it's called, that is evaluation from a social justice standpoint. And I love it because most books up to this point or have either been standalone, it's like a standalone chapter. Like, okay, a social justice lens, like the Mertens and Wilson's textbook is really great that it adds that kind of fourth branch to the theory tree and adds that transformative paradigm. But her book has it permeate the entire process, like thinking about evaluation from a social justice lens throughout from start to end, which I really appreciate. So she brings in like critical race theories, feminist evaluation approaches, evaluation practitioners of color, indigenous scholars, like throughout the entire thing. So we're not just getting what has historically been a white male perspective for the most part that has historically been what our field has been.
Right.
And that's something I've been working on personally. And like, if I were to switch textbooks, it would be that one. Other resources I tend to navigate my students towards are the AEA 365 blogs. Those are great nice short pieces to get a sense of what's going on in the field. Better Evaluation has a wonderful website that I always gravitate people towards. The Western Michigan has their list of checklists that I love to assign as readings oftentimes, and I adapt those into my grading rubrics for their evaluation proposals. And then I always try to, and I'm very rarely successful. Every once in a while, I get a student to get students onto Twitter. Because I think the Twitter community, the evaluation Twitter community is a wonderful group of people, but that's where I get most of my professional development these days, because people will share their blogs or whatever on there, and I will learn about them, read about them, find out more on there, or I'll just get to have conversations with folks. I've met some wonderful colleagues through Twitter. I get the sense the same is true on LinkedIn, but I'm just not as active there, and I haven't quite figured out LinkedIn. Don't quite like the platform, but I know there's a great community on there as well.
Yeah. I only, there is, I only have sort of enough bandwidth for one, if that, and I try to limit how much I check. And so I'll check Twitter once in a while, but it tends to, lead to like a lot of time on there. So, with LinkedIn, LinkedIn, there's some great stuff too. And I feel like there's a lot you can get. I'm just seeing what's going on, what's being posted about, and different like interviews, stuff that you've done. So let's talk about that. Getting in touch with you, following like your work. How do people, so on your handle on Twitter, is that a good place then? It sounds like. Yeah.
Twitter's a great place. It's at Dana Wanzer, just my full name. You can also find me on my website, danawanzer.com. I'm also on Instagram, but it's kind of more me just posting pictures of my dogs more than anything. Occasionally I get a little nerdy on there. And TikToks. I've been getting into TikTok lately, which is a major time suck. But there's some cool communities of people. Like, I've been learning Excel tips. Like, somebody just does Excel tips that some of them I had never heard of. I was like,
really?
Oh, this is
like a 1 minute, like a 1 minute Excel tip, like just
exactly.
I've been looking for like evaluation stuff on there. I haven't seen anything, but maybe that's just like some months ago. But it's Pinterest. Do you ever go on there?
No, I don't even have an account. Like sometimes I'll see like a cool Pinterest board that I'll
Uh-huh.
like look at, but it's usually not even anything that I want to save. So I'm not on Pinterest very much either. I'm
Okay.
on Facebook, but that's a personal account. And then LinkedIn, I think it's also at Dana Wanzer. The after my name is Dana Wanzer as well.
Great. Perfect. And then I guess they could find you on your UW Stout website, also
Yep.
email and so forth. Great. Um, Anything else we didn't cover that you want to mention, or is that anything else?
Ooh, I don't think so. Well, I mean, I have a podcast as
Oh
well.
yeah,
So
podcast. That's right. Yeah,
yeah.
Evaluate.
And Evaluland, yep. That rolls off the tongue, maybe not so nicely, but so I've got that. And on that, I just want to give a little plug and shout out to all the other evaluation podcasts that are out there. I've got a link on my evaluland.fireside.fm on the website. There's a link to all the other evaluation podcasts that I am aware of, some of which are discontinued, but I've been trying to maintain that list. So if you like evaluation podcasts, check that out. Both of yours should be on there. Your YouTube, I think your YouTube as well. But the Data Talks and do you have two podcasts now? Because I
So I
see
changed it.
Eval Network.
Yeah, I changed the name to Eval Network. Yeah, from
Okay,
Data Talks.
I'll
Yeah,
need to change
yeah,
that on the website then, because I
yeah.
think it still
Yeah.
says Data Talks. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the discussion. Really, really interesting, and look forward to talking with you more, and hopefully seeing you at AEA in the near future, in person one day.
Hopefully someday.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
great.